6 years after the divorce, they meet again. She, a single mother-to-be, and he, a millionaire CEO. The passion reignites, and he will do anything to win back the lost love. A story of overcoming, redemption, and love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The elevator at St. Mary's Hospital emitted a soft beep before stopping abruptly on the 5th floor. Sarah Adams gripped her worn leather folder containing the ultrasound results tighter, feeling her heart race as she waited for the doors to open. At 32, she had developed a precise routine for these monthly appointments. She always arrived 15 minutes early, went straight to the obstetrics floor and waited in the corner chair, away from the smiling couples flipping through baby magazines. Today, however, fate had other plans. The doors opened with a metallic whisper, and there he was. David Johnson, the man she swore she would never see again, filled almost the entire width of the corridor with his imposing presence. The charcoal grey Italian suit hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, and his dark brown hair, now with a few grey strands at the temples, was impeccably styled. In his hands, a bouquet of white roses, exactly the same flowers he brought every Sunday when they were married. Sarah. The deep, velvety voice that haunted her dreams pronounced her name like a prayer. She hesitated at the elevator threshold, her body betraying her mind by refusing to take a step forward. His masculine scent, a blend of sandalwood and bergamot, invaded her nostrils, instantly transporting her back to lazy Sundays in Central Park, when they still believed love was enough to overcome any obstacle. David. The response came out as a thread of voice, almost lost in the hospital's surrounding bustle. His eyes automatically fell to the pronounced curve of her belly, visible even under the carefully chosen navy blue midi dress meant to disguise the advance of her pregnancy. For a moment, a mix of surprise and something she couldn't identify, perhaps pain, perhaps relief, passed over his face like a shadow. "You are," he began, but the words died in his throat. 6 months pregnant, Sarah completed, lifting her chin with the dignity she had learned to cultivate over the past years. "And you, it seems, still have the habit of visiting hospitals with flowers?" A melancholic smile curved his lips. "My mother, gallbladder surgery, nothing serious, but you know how dramatic she is." Mrs. Johnson. Sarah almost smiled at the memory of her mother-in-law, who treated her like a daughter and cried more than she did on the day the divorce papers were signed. The woman who always said David was a fool for letting go of the best thing that ever happened in his life. "How is she?" The question slipped out naturally before Sarah could contain her genuine curiosity. "Complaining that the nurses don't make strong enough coffee and that the television only has bad shows." David relaxed slightly, and that low laugh she knew so well escaped his lips. "So, perfectly normal." An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the sounds of the hospital. The shuffling of shoes on the floor, whispered conversations, the distant beeping of medical equipment. Sarah noticed that other people were starting to watch them. A couple blocking the elevator entrance was an unusual scene, even in a place like this. "I need to go." She stepped aside, but David didn't move. "Sarah, wait." He extended, his free hand stopping inches from touching her arm. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes." "There's nothing to talk about, David." The words came out harsher than she intended. "This is just an unfortunate coincidence. It means nothing. It means something to me." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Seeing you like this, knowing you're going to be a mother. Sarah, I never stopped." "No." She interrupted him, raising her hand in a defensive gesture. "Don't do this. Not now, not here, not after 6 years of absolute silence." David closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. When he opened them again, Sarah saw a vulnerability she didn't recognize in the man she had been married to for 4 years. "You're right. I don't have the right to show up in your life and expect that. But Sarah, you need to know that not a single day has passed that I haven't thought of you. Not one day." Funny. Bitterness tinged her words. "You didn't think of me when you were signing contracts until 2 in the morning. You didn't think of me when you cancelled our honeymoon for the 3rd time. And you definitely didn't think of me when you chose your business over our family." The accusations hung in the air like broken glass. David flinched slightly, as if each word were a physical blow. "You're right, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "But the company has changed, Sarah. I have changed. I have 200 employees now, and they all leave work at 6 in the evening. No one works weekends unless it's strictly necessary. I learned from my mistakes." Sarah felt a pang of something, curiosity, hope, but immediately suppressed it. "It's too late for this, David." "For us, perhaps." He agreed, and the resignation in his voice surprised her. "But it's not too late for you to know that I have become the man you deserved by your side." A nurse passed between them, carrying a stack of charts, and the interruption broke the tense spell surrounding them. Sarah seized the distraction to step back a few paces. "I have an appointment," she murmured, nodding towards the sign that pointed to the doctor's office. "Of course," David nodded, finally moving to clear the way. "Sarah?" She turned against her better judgment. "Congratulations on the baby. I hope you are very happy." The painful sincerity in his voice almost broke the armor she had built around her heart. For a moment, Sarah saw not the successful and arrogant businessman who had been her ex-husband, but the passionate young architect who once promised to build a home where they would grow old together. "Thank you," she whispered, then walked down the hallway, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back until she disappeared around the corner leading to the doctor's office. While waiting in the waiting room, Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, where her daughter was moving restlessly, as if sensing her mother's emotional turmoil. 6 years. 6 years of rebuilding, learning to be strong on her own, building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. And it took just 5 minutes for all the certainties she had cultivated to start swaying like leaves in the wind. Outside, David remained still for long minutes, the white flowers trembling in his hands, before finally heading towards his mother's room, carrying in his chest the image of Sarah pregnant, a vision that would change everything he thought he knew about second chances. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter at the hospital, and Sarah was trying to convince herself that she had forgotten the episode. Sitting at her desk at Thompson & Associates Financial Consulting, she was reviewing cash flow spreadsheets with her usual concentration, ignoring the growing discomfort in her back and the waves of nausea that came and went irregularly. The office occupied the 15th floor of a commercial building in Midtown, and from the window next to her workstation, Sarah could see the frenetic movement of the East River. Cars crawled under the strong February sun, creating a heat mirage that danced over the asphalt. "Sarah, are you okay? You look a bit pale," commented Julia, her closest co-worker, a woman in her 40s with curly hair, always tied up in a messy bun, and red glasses she insisted on calling vintage. "Just tired," Sarah replied, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "This presentation for Millennium Construction is giving me a hard time." It was a lie, at least partially. The presentation was almost ready. Sarah had always been meticulous, with deadlines. What really bothered her were the dreams. Every night since their reunion, she dreamed of David. Not the angry nightmares that had haunted her in the early years after the divorce, but good memories, Sunday mornings when they would wake up late and make pancakes together, walks in Central Park, discussing the books they read, whispered plans in the dark about the house they would build and the children they would have. "Sarah!" Julia's shrill voice seemed to come from far away. Everything blurred. The spreadsheets on the computer screen turned into colourful smudges, and a high-pitched buzzing filled her ears. Sarah tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't respond. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the white office ceiling spinning like an uncontrolled carousel. When she woke up, she was lying on the couch in the company's break room, with a cold compress on her forehead and Julia's worried face hovering over her. But that wasn't what left her confused. It was the unmistakable presence of David Johnson sitting in the armchair beside her, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up and a barely concealed panic in his dark eyes. "What? How did you—" Sarah tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her to lie back down. "Easy, dear. The doctor said it was just a drop in blood pressure, but you really gave us a scare." Julia adjusted the compress on her forehead. "David arrived about 20 minutes ago. Apparently you two know each other." Sarah looked at David, who seemed just as bewildered as she was. "How did you know I was here?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture she recognized well. Mark Thompson is my college friend. When I found out you worked here, I asked him to let me know if anything happened. You asked him to keep an eye on me." Indignation made Sarah sit up abruptly, ignoring the dizziness. "What right do you have to—" "Sarah, please." David raised his hands in a calming gesture. "It's not surveillance. It's just concern. When I saw you pregnant at the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about whether you were okay, if someone was taking care of you. I've been taking care of myself for 6 years, thank you." The words came out sharp as blades. "I know you do." David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You've always been the strongest person I've known. But being pregnant is different, Sarah. It's too vulnerable to face alone." Julia watched back and forth like someone watching a tennis match, clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding before her. Sarah noticed her co-worker's attention and felt exposed, as if her most intimate wounds were being displayed for someone else's entertainment. "Julia, can you give us a minute?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Sure. I'll check if the doctor has released your test results." Julia left the room, but not before casting a curious glance at David. Silence settled between them, heavy as the air before a storm. Sarah discreetly observed David, his shoulders tense under the light blue dress shirt, his hands intertwined with such force that the knuckles were white, the vein bulging at his temple that always appeared when he was nervous. "Why, David?" she finally asked. "Why did you show up here? What do you want from me?" He looked up, and Sarah saw a raw honesty in his eyes that caught her off guard. "I don't know. I just know that when Mark called me saying you had fainted, I dropped everything and rushed over. I cancelled a meeting with Japanese investors, left my team waiting in the conference room. Nothing else mattered except making sure you were okay." "That's not fair." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, and she hated her own weakness. "You can't just disappear from my life and then reappear like some kind of guardian angel. It doesn't work that way." "I know." David stood up and began pacing the small room like a caged animal. "I know I have no right. I know I'm the last person you want to see when you're going through a tough time. But Sarah, I need you to understand one thing." He stopped in front of her, crouching down to meet her eye level. "When our marriage ended, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost my best friend, my confidant, the only person in the world who truly knew me. And now, seeing you like this, pregnant and radiant, even unconscious on the office floor, I realized I also lost the chance to be the father of your children." The tears Sarah had been trying to hold back finally streamed down her cheeks. "David, don't do this to me. Please." "I'm not trying to win you back," he said softly, but his words carried a weight that contradicted his intention. I want to be around. I want to make sure you and the baby are safe. That's all I'm asking." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions that David always managed to stir in her. Anger, longing, hurt, and, she reluctantly admitted, relief. Because as much as she hated to admit it, there were nights when she felt frighteningly alone, especially after discovering her pregnancy. "The baby's father," David hesitated, as if the words burned his throat. "Is he in the picture?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "That's none of your business." "You're right. I'm sorry." He stepped back, but not before she noticed the relief that quickly passed through his eyes when she didn't confirm the presence of another man in her life. The door opened, and Julia returned, carrying an envelope with the test results. "The doctor said your iron levels are low, which explains the fainting. You need to rest more and take vitamin supplements." "Thank you, Julia." Sarah took the envelope, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. "I'll take you home," David announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't have to. I can call an Uber." "Sarah," his voice became firmer, "you just fainted. You're 6 months pregnant. I'm not letting you go home alone in an Uber." She wanted to protest, but the truth was she felt exhausted and dizzy. The thought of facing the traffic in São Paulo alone really didn't appeal to her. "All right," she reluctantly agreed, "but just to my place. No talking on the way." David nodded, but Sarah caught the small, victorious smile he tried to hide. As she gathered her things, she wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if perhaps fate was trying to give her a second chance. David's Mercedes-Benz glided silently through the congested streets of Midtown towards Sarah's apartment in Chinatown. The interior of the car smelled of new leather and the familiar masculine cologne she remembered so well, creating an intimate bubble that contrasted with the urban chaos outside. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the window, watching the glass facades of the office buildings give way to older, more characterful constructions in the city center. "You don't have to feel uncomfortable." David broke the silence they had maintained for the last 15 minutes. "I know you said not to talk, but can I at least put on some music?" "Sure," Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the window. But when the first notes of "Here Comes the Sun" filled the car, she couldn't suppress a nostalgic smile. "It's still your favorite song." It wasn't a question, but a gentle observation. "Some things don't change." She finally looked at him, noticing how he held the steering wheel with both hands, his shoulders still tense, despite his attempt to appear relaxed. As they entered Chinatown, David slowed down, clearly recognizing the area. This was where they used to come on Sunday mornings when they were still married, to have breakfast at the Asian market and buy exotic ingredients that Sarah used in the culinary experiments they did together. There. Sarah pointed to a 5-story residential building with a faded yellow facade and small balconies adorned with wrought iron railings. "The yellow building." David parked in front of the building, turning off the engine but making no move to get out of the car. Sarah waited a few seconds before realizing he was studying the building with an expression she couldn't decipher. "It's different from what I imagined," he finally said. "Different how?" The defensiveness in her voice was evident. "It's not that." David turned to her, and Sarah saw that his eyes held no judgment, only a deep sadness. "It's just that, when I think of you, I still picture our penthouse in Central Park, the terrace where you grew orchids, the kitchen where we had those endless dinners. It's hard to accept that you've built an entire life away from all that." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. "That life wasn't real, David. It was a fantasy sustained by your financial success and my naivety. It wasn't a fantasy, he replied with an intensity that surprised her. The love we felt was real. The dreams we shared were real. What wasn't real was my belief that I could have it all, you, the family, and still be the youngest and most successful CEO in New York. A heavy silence settled between them. Sarah looked at the building where she had lived for 3 years, trying to see it through David's eyes. It wasn't as luxurious as the penthouse they shared, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by her. Every decoration reflected her personal taste, free from the influence of expensive decorators or the need to impress clients. "Do you want to come up?" The words slipped from her mouth before she could think them through. David looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" "No." Sarah laughed nervously. "But I think I need help getting up the stairs, and you're not leaving until you know I'm safe at home." They climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, David keeping a protective hand on her back, ready to support her if necessary. The hallway of the building was filled with the smell of home-cooked meals, beans, sautéed garlic, chocolate cake, wafting under the doors of the neighbors. Sarah's apartment was small but cozy. The living room opened directly from the entrance with a beige fabric sofa, a bookshelf filled with books, and a light wood coffee table piled with baby magazines and some work she had brought home. The walls were decorated with black and white photographs of the places she had visited during her solo travels in recent years. Machu Picchu, the beaches of Tulum, the historic district in Savannah. "It's beautiful," David said, and Sarah realized he was speaking seriously. "It's very you. Thank you." She sat heavily on the sofa, finally allowing the exhaustion of the day to wash over her. "Do you want some coffee? Water?" "Let me make it." David was already heading to the compact kitchen that was integrated with the living room. "Where do you keep the coffee?" "Upper right cabinet." Sarah watched him move through the limited space with a familiarity that unsettled her. It was as if he had always been there, as if that small apartment could easily accommodate his imposing presence. David returned a few minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and a glass of water for her. He sat in the armchair next to the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," he began, nervously spinning the cup between his hands. "About how I found out you were working at Thompson and Associates." She looked at him over the cup, waiting. "It wasn't a coincidence that I ran into you at the hospital." David took a deep breath. "I've known where you've worked for 2 years. I've known where you lived for a year and a half. I know you shop at the corner store every Saturday morning and that you have yoga classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the studio on Main Street." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "You've been following me." "No!" David stood up abruptly, almost spilling the coffee. "That's not it. I never followed you, never invaded your privacy, but I have. A private investigator who sends me reports about you." "A private investigator." Sarah repeated the words slowly, as if trying to process information in a foreign language. "Sarah, let me explain. Get out of here." Her voice came out low, dangerously controlled. "Please listen to me. I said to get out of here." Sarah stood up suddenly, ignoring the dizziness. "You're sick, David. Sick and obsessive. How dare you violate my privacy like this?" David stopped in the middle of the room, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "I needed to know if you were okay. After the divorce, when you just disappeared, I was desperate. You changed your phone number, your address, blocked all my social media, because I wanted you out of my life." Tears of anger burned in her eyes. "Because I needed to heal, David, and you never gave me that chance." "You're right," he said softly, and the resignation in his voice caught her off guard. You have every right to be furious. I violated your privacy, crossed all boundaries. But Sarah, I did it because I still love you. Because for the past 6 years, I haven't been able to stop worrying about you for a single day. That's not love, David. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. That's obsession. That's control. It's exactly what destroyed our marriage. David closed his eyes as if the words were physical blows. I know, and that's why I stopped. What do you mean? The last report I received was 6 months ago. When I found out you were pregnant, I fired the investigator. He opened his eyes and looked directly at her. Because I realized that if you decided to have a child, you finally found the happiness I could never give you, and I had no right to interfere in that. Sarah sat down again, her legs trembling from the emotional overload. So why were you at the hospital that day? My mother really had surgery. David sat on the edge of the armchair, as if ready to run at any moment. But I confess that when I found out it was at St. Mary's, and remembered that you were having your prenatal care there, a part of me hoped to see you. I didn't plan it, but I hoped. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of traffic and the ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. Sarah pressed her hands against her belly, where the baby was moving restlessly, as if sensing her emotional turmoil. David, she finally said, her voice tired, I need you to leave now. He nodded, standing up slowly. I will, but Sarah, what I said about still loving you, that's true. And if one day you want to talk, really talk about us, about what happened, about who we became, I will be waiting. He headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the doorknob. And, Sarah, congratulations on the baby. You're going to be an amazing mother. When the door closed behind him, Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, finally allowing the tears to come in full force. Because despite the invasion of privacy, despite the anger, despite all the years of accumulated hurt, a treacherous part of her heart had warmed when David said he still loved her, and that terrified her more than any private investigator ever could. 2 weeks after the revelation about the private investigator, Sarah had managed to establish a routine that didn't include thoughts about David Johnson. At least during the day. The nights were another story, but she preferred not to analyze the dreams that increasingly visited her. It was a rainy Thursday in March when everything changed. Sarah was at home, working on her laptop at the kitchen table, enjoying the work-from-home day that the company had implemented for expectant mothers. Outside, the rain that had started as a morning drizzle had turned into a violent storm typical of summer in New York. Her apartment was on the ground floor of the building, something she had always considered an advantage. No need to climb stairs when she came home, tired from work. At that moment, however, watching the rainwater begin to form small puddles on the sidewalk through the window, Sarah felt the first pang of apprehension in her stomach. It can't be, she murmured to herself, getting up from the table to get a better look at the street. The usually busy Glory Street was practically deserted. The few cars that passed created waves that spread across the already flooded sidewalks. The neighborhood's drainage system, always inadequate, clearly wasn't coping with the volume of water. The phone rang, and Sarah answered without taking her eyes off the window. "Sarah, are you watching the news?" It was Julia, her voice tense with concern. "They're talking about flooding in several areas, including Chinatown." "I'm seeing it from the window." Sarah watched the water slowly rising in the street. "I think I'm going to have to get out of here." "Do you have somewhere to go?" Sarah paused. Her parents lived in Rochester, too far to be a practical option. Her sister Carla was traveling for work. Her few close friends lived in neighborhoods that were probably facing the same problems. I'll figure something out," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. After hanging up, Sarah began to move around the house, gathering important documents and some clothes into a small suitcase. The water in the street was rising more quickly now, and she could hear the sound of objects being swept away by the current. That's when the first wave invaded her home. The dark water slithered under the front door like a malicious serpent, quickly spreading across the ceramic floor of the living room. Sarah climbed onto the kitchen table, her heart racing as she watched her furniture. The beige sofa she had carefully chosen, the bookshelf she had assembled herself, the coffee table where she kept the first ultrasound photos, slowly being covered by the dirty water. No, 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 she repeated like a mantra, one hand instinctively protecting the belly where her nearly 7-month-old daughter was stirring restlessly, as if sensing her mother's panic. The phone rang again, and Sarah answered with trembling hands. "Sarah, my love, are you okay?" Mrs. Johnson, her neighbor from the apartment above, sounded worried. "Mrs. Carmen's son is here. He brought a small boat to rescue people from the ground floor. I need to get out of here." Sarah looked around, trying to decide what was essential to take. "Mrs. Johnson, can you come down to help me with a few things?" "Of course, dear. I'm on my way." In the next 20 minutes, Sarah lived a nightmare in slow motion. With the help of Mrs. Johnson and young Mark, the son of a neighbor, she managed to save some documents, basic clothes, and the photo album that held her most precious memories. But she was forced to watch helplessly as the dirty water destroyed 3 years of carefully built life. Mark's boat was actually a small inflatable raft that barely fit 2 people. Sarah settled in the middle, the suitcase in her arms, as he paddled slowly through the street-turned river. "Where to, Mrs. Sarah?" Mark asked, his words almost lost in the sound of the rain. Sarah looked at the unrecognizable landscape around her. Abandoned cars half submerged, floating debris, people in the upper-floor windows of buildings watching the devastation. She had never felt so alone and vulnerable in her life. That's when she saw the black Mercedes-Benz parked at the end of the street on higher ground, and David Johnson standing next to the car, completely soaked, his eyes scanning the water for her. "There," Sarah pointed, her voice coming out as a whisper. "Please, take me to that man." Mark paddled in the indicated direction, and as they got closer, Sarah could see the pure relief wash over David's face when he spotted her. He stepped into the water without hesitation, soaking his expensive suit up to his waist to help pull the raft. "Sarah, thank God," he murmured, extending his arms to help her out of the raft. "When I saw the news about the flooding in Chinatown, How did you know?" she asked, allowing him to carry her to the car, her strength completely drained. "I said I stopped with the investigator, not that I stopped worrying." David opened the passenger door, helping her settle in. "When I saw it was going to rain heavily this morning, I had a bad feeling. I came to check and arrived just as the water started to rise." Sarah looked back one last time, seeing her street completely flooded, her yellow building with the ground floor completely submerged. Everything she had built over the past few years was down there, destroyed. "I have nowhere to go," she said softly, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. "I've lost everything, David, everything." "You haven't lost everything." David started the car, the heater expelling the damp cold that had settled into her bones. "You're alive. The baby is fine. We can figure out the rest." "We?" Sarah looked at him through the tears that were beginning to blur her vision. David made a careful turn, avoiding the still flooded areas. "Sarah, I know you have every reason not to trust me. I know I invaded your privacy and that you're angry with me, but now is not the time for pride. You need a place to stay, at least until we sort out the apartment situation." "David, I can't." "I'm not asking you to come back to me." He gently interrupted her. I'm offering you a guest room in my house until you get back on your feet. No ulterior motives, no pressure, just a safe, dry place for you and the baby." Sarah closed her eyes, too exhausted to argue. The rain beat against the windshield in a hypnotic rhythm, and the warmth of the car was making her tense muscles relax for the first time in hours. "Just for a few days," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Just for a few days." David agreed, but Sarah didn't see the small, hopeful smile that curved his lips as they drove toward Central Park, where a house she knew very well awaited them. That night, lying in the guest room that had been her office when they lived together, Sarah looked out the window at the illuminated garden where she had cultivated orchids years ago. The irony did not go unnoticed. A storm had swept away all her efforts for independence and brought her back to the only place where, despite everything, she still felt safe. The baby stirred gently in her belly, as if finally finding peace, and Sarah wondered if fate was trying to teach her that sometimes accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. Morning arrived with a soft golden light filtering through the beige linen curtains of the guest room. Sarah woke up disoriented for a few seconds, feeling strange on the soft mattress and the familiar scent of imported fabric softener that always permeated the fabrics of David's house. It took a moment for the reality of the previous night to hit her with full force. The flood, the loss of her belongings, and now being back in the house that had been her home for 4 years. She slowly sat up in bed, one hand caressing her belly where her daughter was stretching with lazy movements. At 7 months pregnant, every movement required more effort, and Sarah felt an involuntary pang of gratitude for being in a comfortable place instead of the cramped sofa of some cheap hotel. The guest room had been completely renovated since the time it was her office. The walls, once painted light green and decorated with her plants and books, now sported a neutral pearl grey tone. A reading chair occupied the corner near the window, and an antique dark wood dresser replaced the modern desk where she used to work on her freelance projects. A familiar aroma wafted through the house: strong Brazilian coffee, toasted French bread, and something that suspiciously smelled like tapioca. Sarah furrowed her brow. David had never been good in the kitchen. His culinary attempts during their marriage always resulted in takeout orders or Sarah taking charge of the preparations. Wearing the bathrobe she found carefully folded on the chair and trying not to think about how David knew her current size, Sarah descended the marble stairs leading to the ground floor. The house looked different in the daylight, cozier and less imposing than in her memories. The decor had subtly changed. The ultra-modern and cold furniture that dominated the space when she lived there had given way to cozier pieces. A caramel leather sofa instead of the minimalist white set. Colorful Persian rugs covering the marble floor, and to her surprise, some of her photographs still hanging on the walls. "Good morning." The voice came from the kitchen, accompanied by the sound of something frying in a pan. Sarah walked into the room and found a scene she never imagined possible. David Johnson, CEO of one of the largest construction technology companies in the country, was standing at the stove, wearing only a grey t-shirt and pajama pants, preparing tapioca with the concentration of a professional chef. "You learned to cook?" she asked, unable to hide the surprise in her voice. David turned around, a shy smile curving his lips. "I learned some basic things, breakfast mainly. I found out that ordering takeout at 7 in the morning every day is kind of depressing." He served the tapioca on a white porcelain plate, filled with cheese and honey, exactly how Sarah liked it. Next to it, a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, still foamy, indicating it had been made just a few minutes ago. "David," she began, but he raised his hand in a gentle gesture. "Before you say anything, I want to make it clear that this is not an attempt to win you over with breakfast. He pulled out a chair for her. The chair at the kitchen island. It's just basic hospitality. You're pregnant, you went through a traumatic situation yesterday, and you need to eat well. Sarah sat down, admitting to herself that she was hungry. Thank you for the food and for yesterday, for getting me out of there. You don't need to thank me. David poured himself some coffee and sat in the chair next to her, keeping a respectful distance. How are you feeling? Did you sleep well? Better than I expected. She tried the tapioca and couldn't help but smile, suppressing a small moan of pleasure. It was perfect, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, with just the right amount of salt and sweetness. It's delicious. YouTube is an amazing tool. David chuckled softly. Who would have thought that the guy who couldn't make a decent fried egg would learn to make tapioca by watching videos online? A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of leaves rustling in the garden outside and the distant roar of morning traffic in New York City. Sarah discreetly watched David as she ate. He was different, not just physically, with slightly longer hair and some expression lines that hadn't been there before, but there was a calmness in him that she didn't recognize. The man she had known was pure kinetic energy, always with his phone in hand, always checking emails, always on the move. David, she finally said, we need to talk about the practical arrangements. I can't stay here indefinitely. I know. He nodded, but didn't seem surprised by the topic. I called my realtor this morning. She's going to find some rental apartment options in safe neighborhoods with good infrastructure for when the baby arrives. I can't afford an expensive apartment, Sarah said, the financial reality hitting her like a punch to the stomach. The insurance will cover part of the flood damage, but until that gets processed... Sarah, David gently interrupted her. You don't need to worry about that right now. Let me handle the initial expenses, and you can pay me back when you can. No interest, no rush. I can't accept your charity. The response came out harsher than she intended. It's not charity. David stood up and began washing the dishes, turning his back to her. It's responsibility, my responsibility for not being the husband you deserved, for not creating a situation where you felt safe, asking for help if you needed it. Sarah watched him wash the dishes with precise and careful movements. There was something almost meditative about the way he performed the domestic task, as if he were savoring the simplicity of the act. You've changed, she said suddenly, the words coming out unfiltered. David paused, his hands still in the soapy water. What do you mean? You are calmer, more present. The David I knew would never make tapioca in the morning or wash dishes by hand. He would be checking his phone every 2 minutes and delegating those tasks to the maid. David turned to her, drying his hands on a dish towel. You're right. I've changed. Or at least, I'm trying to change. Why? He leaned against the kitchen counter, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her look away. Because losing you was the worst thing that ever happened in my life. And because it took me 6 years to understand that all the wealth, all the professional success, all the business achievements mean absolutely nothing if you don't have someone to share it with, someone who truly matters. David, let me finish. He raised his hand. I'm not saying this to pressure you or to try to win you back. I'm saying it because you deserve to know that your leaving my life wasn't in vain. You taught me that I was an empty man, Sarah. And although it hurt to admit it, it was the best gift you could have given me. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. It wasn't a gift. It was desperation. I was drowning in that marriage, David, becoming invisible. I know, and I hate myself for that. His voice became hoarse. I hate myself for making you feel that way, for wasting 4 years of your life. They weren't wasted. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I learned a lot about myself, about what I want, about what I won't accept anymore. David nodded slowly, and I learned that some lessons can only be learned in the most absolute solitude. Sarah's phone rang, breaking the intense moment. It was Julia, asking about her situation and offering help. While Sarah reassured her friend, David quietly left the kitchen. When she finished the call, she found a card from a cleaning and restoration company on the counter, along with a handwritten note. They will come to your apartment today at 2 p.m. to assess the damage and start the cleaning. No obligation. D. Sarah held the paper between her fingers, realizing that David had written with the Mont Blanc pen she had given him for their second wedding anniversary. He was still using it. It was a small detail, but it meant a lot. Perhaps, just perhaps, the 6 years of separation had taught them both the value of what they had lost. The office of the restoration company was located in Midtown, in a modern glass building that reflected the heavy clouds of the New York afternoon. Sarah was sitting in a comfortable upholstered chair, watching the insurance specialist review photos of the damage in her apartment through a tablet. David stood beside her, occasionally asking technical questions she hadn't even thought to formulate. From what I can assess from the images, Ms. Sarah, we have minimal structural damage, but total loss of the ground floor furniture and a good portion of the appliances. The middle-aged man, who introduced himself as Roger, spoke with the efficiency of someone who dealt with tragedies daily. The insurance should cover about 70% of the material damages. And the other 30%? Sarah asked, although she already knew the answer. Unfortunately, that will be your responsibility. David shifted beside her, and Sarah could feel the tension in his muscles. She knew him well enough to know that he was controlling himself not to offer immediate payment for the uncovered costs. How long would it take for the apartment to be livable again, David asked. With the full team, about 3 weeks for the cleaning and drying. 2 more weeks to replace what was lost, if you have already decided on the new furniture and appliances. 5 weeks. Sarah felt the weight of reality settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. 5 weeks, living in David's house, navigating the complexities of being close to the man who still stirred feelings in her that she preferred to keep buried. "Can we start tomorrow?" David asked, and Sarah turned to him, surprised. "David, I haven't decided if—" "Sarah." He leaned down to meet her gaze. "You need a place to live when the baby is born. Your apartment is perfect. Location, size, security. It makes sense to restore it. But the cost, we can talk about that later." David turned to the specialist. "Mark, can you start the work tomorrow?" "Of course, Mr. Johnson. The team will be there at 8 in the morning." During the drive back to the house in Central Park, Sarah remained silent, watching New York City through the car window. The traffic was lighter than usual, and they managed to cross the city without the typical rush-hour jams. David respected her need for quiet, keeping only the soft sound of jazz playing on the car stereo. It was only when they entered the garage of the house that Sarah finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" David turned off the engine, but made no move to exit the car. "Doing what?" "Taking care of everything, paying for everything, acting like it's your responsibility." "Because it is my responsibility." The answer came without hesitation. "Maybe not legally, but morally, yes." "I don't understand." David turned in his seat to face her fully. "Sarah, when you left home that night after our last fight, you took only a suitcase and your dignity. You left everything behind. The jewelry I gave you, the car that was in your name, the joint bank account that had over $200,000. Sarah remembered that terrible night, The argument had started over him missing yet another of her medical appointments, an important test to investigate why they couldn't get pregnant. It escalated into old accusations and reopened wounds until she could no longer bear it. She packed her bags and left, determined never to accept anything from him again. "I didn't want your money," she said softly. "I know, and that hurt me more than if you had taken everything." David ran a hand through his hair. "Because you chose to work as a junior analyst instead of using the business degree you already had. You chose to rent a small apartment instead of keeping the penthouse. You chose to start from scratch rather than have anything that reminded you of me. It was the only way to heal, and it was brave. But Sarah, now you're not alone." David pointed to her belly. "You have a daughter to protect, and if accepting my help means she will have a safe and comfortable place to grow up, then your pride cannot be more important than her well-being." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach because she knew he was right. She had built an independent life at great effort and sacrifice, but now she had to think beyond herself. "There's one condition," she finally said. "What?" "I want a contract, detailing exactly how much you're spending and how I will pay you back, with market interest." David sighed. "Sarah, it's this, or I look for another place to stay today." Her voice was firm, but David could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "All right, I'll ask my lawyer to draft a contract." They entered the house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah went straight to the guest room, claiming fatigue, but she actually needed space to process the conflicting emotions that David always managed to stir in her. Lying on the bed, her hands caressing the belly where the baby was moving restlessly, Sarah allowed herself, for the first time in years, to imagine how things might have been different. If David had been from the start the man he seemed to be becoming, if she hadn't had to choose between her marriage and her mental sanity. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. "Sarah, can I come in?" David's voice came muffled through the wood. "Come in." He appeared holding a tray with chamomile tea and cookies. "I thought you might be hungry. You hardly ate today." "Thank you." Sarah sat up on the bed, accepting the steaming cup. The tea was at the perfect temperature and sweetened just the way she liked it. Further evidence that David had paid attention to the details she thought he never noticed. "David," she said after a few sips, "why did you never marry again?" The question caught him off guard. He sat in the chair near the window, keeping physical distance but not emotional. "I tried," he admitted. "I dated a few women over the years, some even very special. But there always came a point where I found myself comparing them to you, to the way you laughed at your own jokes, how you sang while cooking, how focused you got when reading an interesting book." Sarah felt her heart race. "David, it wasn't fair to them," he continued as if he hadn't heard her. "Being physically present but emotionally absent, so I stopped trying." "And now?" The question slipped out before she could hold it back. David looked her directly in the eyes. "Now I know that some loves are definitive, that some people mark our souls so deeply that anything else feels like a pale shadow of what we lived with them." The silence that followed was heavy with unexpressed possibilities. Sarah finished the tea, feeling warmth spreading through her chest, and she wasn't sure if it was from the drink or his words. I need to sleep," she finally said. "Of course." David stood up, taking the empty cup. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me take care of you, even if it's just temporarily." When he left and closed the door, Sarah stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter had finally settled down. For the first time in 6 years, she allowed herself to question if perhaps, just perhaps, some stories deserved a second chapter. But there was still much to resolve, many wounds to heal, and a child about to be born that would change everything once again. The future remained uncertain. But one thing Sarah knew for sure: no matter what happened from then on, she was no longer facing it alone. The second week at David's house began with a strangely domestic routine that left Sarah feeling uneasy. Every morning she woke up to the aroma of fresh coffee wafting up the stairs and found David in the kitchen preparing breakfast before heading off to work. They talked about neutral topics: the progress of the apartment renovation, the news of the day, the development of her pregnancy, carefully avoiding the minefields of their shared past. However, that Thursday, the fragile peace was shattered by an unexpected visit. Sarah was in the backyard, sitting on the lounge chair where she used to read when she lived there, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes she had planted years ago. David had kept the garden exactly as she had left it, even the small herb garden she used for cooking. So it's true. A familiar voice, heavy with disapproval, made her turn around. Carla Adams was standing at the patio door, her blonde hair impeccably styled in a low bun, wearing a grey business suit that screamed professional success. At 35, Sarah's older sister had become a successful corporate lawyer and had never missed an opportunity to express her opinion on her younger sister's life choices. "Carla." Sarah slowly stood up, instinctively protecting her belly. "How did you know where I was?" "Julia told me about the flood. I went to your apartment and spoke with the workers." Carla approached, her eyes scanning the familiar garden with a look of disdain. "They told me that the husband of the owner was paying for the renovation. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." "David is not my husband," Sarah felt the need to clarify immediately. "Oh, of course. He's just the ex-husband who is funding your life again." The irony in Carla's voice was palpable. "Sarah, after everything this man did to you, after how you suffered..." "Carla, it's not what you think." "It's not?" Carla crossed her arms, adopting the interrogative posture she used in court. "Then explain to me what a 7-month pregnant woman is doing at the house of the ex-husband who emotionally destroyed her." Sarah felt blood rush to her face. "My house flooded. I lost everything. David offered temporary help." "Temporary?" Carla repeated the word with skepticism. "Sarah, do you remember how you were when you came to live with me after the divorce? You cried every night, couldn't eat, had to take antidepressants for 6 months." "I remember," Sarah interrupted, her voice firmer. "But that was 6 years ago. People change, Carla." "Some people change. Men like David Johnson just perfect their manipulation techniques." Carla sat down in the chair next to Sarah, slightly softening her tone. "Sarah, I know you're vulnerable right now, pregnant and alone. But accepting his help is like making a pact with the devil." "You don't know him anymore. You don't know how. He is now." "I know how he was." Carla took Sarah's hand. "Controlling, manipulative, capable of making you believe that black was white if it served his interests. And now, conveniently, he shows up like a knight in shining armor at your greatest time of need." Her sister's words echoed the very doubts Sarah had been trying to suppress. Could it be possible that David was orchestrating everything? That somehow he knew about the flood and had shown up at the exact moment to play the hero? "Sarah!" David's voice came from the patio door, and both sisters turned. He was standing in the doorway, still wearing his work suit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. His eyes moved from Sarah to Carla, and Sarah saw the immediate recognition, followed by something that looked like resignation. "Carla," he said, nodding. "Long time no see." "Not long enough." The reply was dry and cutting. David sighed, stepping into the garden with measured steps. "I assume you've come to rescue your sister from the clutches of the big bad wolf." "I came to check if she's okay." Carla stood up, instinctively placing herself between David and Sarah. And from what I see, she's repeating the same mistakes from the past. Carla, please. Sarah tried to intervene, but David raised his hand. No, Sarah, your sister is right to be concerned. David looked directly at Carla. I was a terrible husband. I neglected Sarah, prioritized work over our relationship, and made her feel invisible in her own home. The brutal honesty in his confession caught Carla off guard. She had prepared for a battle, not a surrender. But, David continued, I'm not the same man she married 10 years ago, and I'm not trying to win her back. I'm just offering a safe place for her to stay until her life gets back to normal. And then what? Carla asked, skeptical. Then she goes back to her life and I go back to mine, David replied, but Sarah noticed the slight hesitation in his voice. David. Sarah stood up, feeling the need to mediate the growing tension between them. Carla is worried about me. It's natural. Of course I'm worried. Carla turned to her sister. Sarah, come live with me. My apartment has an extra room. You can stay as long as you need. Sarah looked between the two. Carla with her protective and determined expression, David with a forced calmness that couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. She knew her sister well enough to understand that Carla wouldn't give up easily, and she knew David well enough to realize he was holding back from exploding. I need some time to think, Sarah finally said. Carla, can you stay for dinner? We can talk calmly. Of course, Carla agreed, but her eyes remained fixed on David. I have plenty of time. David nodded briefly. I'll prepare something for the three of us. He headed towards the house, but stopped at the door. Carla, just to be clear, I won't try to stop Sarah from leaving if she decides that's what she wants. But while she's here, I'll make sure she and the baby are safe and comfortable. When David entered the house, Carla turned to Sarah with an expression that mixed frustration and concern. Sarah, I don't trust him. There's something about this whole situation that doesn't sit right with me. Sarah sat down again, feeling the weight of her pregnancy and the conflicting emotions. Carla, I understand your concern, but I need you to trust my judgment. I'm not the broken woman who left this house 6 years ago. No, you're a pregnant and vulnerable woman being swept up by the convenient kindness of the man who almost destroyed you the first time. Carla's words hit their mark, planting seeds of doubt that Sarah knew would germinate overnight, because deep down she too wondered if she was being naive by accepting David's help, if she was confusing gratitude with something more dangerous. The baby stirred restlessly in her belly, as if sensing her emotional turmoil, and Sarah realized she would need to make a decision soon, because staying there, navigating between the past and the present, between hope and fear, was becoming unsustainable for everyone involved. The night promised to be long, and the conversations to come could change everything once again. Dinner began in a tense silence that hung over the dining table like a storm cloud ready to burst. David had prepared shrimp risotto, one of Sarah's favorite dishes during the marriage, but she barely touched her food, dividing her attention between the plate and the piercing glances Carla shot at David every few seconds. The dining room was illuminated by the soft light of crystal chandeliers, creating an intimate atmosphere that brutally contrasted with the palpable tension among the three adults. David cut the fish with surgical precision, each movement controlled, while Carla drank red wine in larger sips than usual. The risotto is excellent, Sarah said, trying to break the ice. You've really learned to cook. YouTube and a lot of practice, David replied, but his eyes remained fixed on the plate. When you live alone for 6 years, you either learn to cook or become a slave to takeout. What a tragedy, Carla commented sarcastically, not bothering to disguise her disdain. A millionaire man having to learn basic survival skills. David paused, the fork halfway to his mouth. Carla, I understand that you hate me. I have more than enough reasons for that. But can we keep the civility for Sarah's sake? Civility, Carla let out a bitter laugh. You want to talk about civility. How about the civility of not emotionally destroying someone who loved you unconditionally? Carla, please. Sarah tried to intervene, but her sister raised her hand. No, Sarah, I've held my tongue for 2 hours, but now I need to speak. Carla turned to David, her eyes shining with controlled fury. Do you have any idea what your sister went through after she left this house? Do you have any idea of the nights she spent awake, blaming herself for the failure of the marriage? The months of therapy she needed to understand that the problem wasn't her? David put his fork down and looked directly at Carla. No, I have no idea, because I was too busy drowning in my own self-destruction to think about what I was causing to others. The brutal honesty of the confession caught Carla off guard for a few seconds. You want to know how I spent those 6 years? David continued, his voice low but intense. The first 2 years, I worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it was the only way to not think about what I had lost. I built a business empire on the ruins of my marriage. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden, hands in his pants pockets. In the 3rd year, I had a nervous breakdown. Literally, I passed out in the conference room during a presentation for investors. The doctor said if I kept up that pace, I'd be dead before I turned 40. Sarah felt her heart tighten. She didn't know any of this. That's when I started therapy. David turned to face them. Twice a week for 3 years. I learned about emotional intelligence, about how my workaholism was a way to escape intimacy, about how I used professional success to mask my complete incompetence in relationships. Carla remained silent, but Sarah could see her sister's armor of anger beginning to crack. You want to know why I never tried to reach out to Sarah during those years? David returned to the table but remained standing. Because I knew she was better off without me, because I knew I still wasn't the man she deserved. And now you are? Carla asked, but the tone was less aggressive. Now I am a man who knows how to recognize his flaws and work to correct them. David sat down again. I'm not perfect, Carla. I still have controlling tendencies. I still need to consciously remind myself to ask questions instead of giving orders. I still struggle against the impulse to solve all problems with money. He looked at Sarah. But I've learned to... Listen, I've learned that love is not possession. It's liberation. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest proof of love is letting someone go. Then why are you here now? Carla asked. Why did you offer help to Sarah? David fell silent for long seconds, clearly weighing his words. Because when I saw her at the hospital, pregnant and radiant, I realized she had found the happiness I could never give her. And when I heard about the flood... He paused, running his hand through his hair. I couldn't bear the thought of her struggling when I had the resources to help. And you expected nothing in return? Carla's question sounded more like curiosity than accusation. I hoped for a chance to redeem myself, at least partially, David admitted. I hoped I could look in the mirror and know that this time, when Sarah needed help, I was there for her. Sarah, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. David, you don't owe me anything. Our marriage is over. We've moved on. You moved on. David gently interrupted her. I got stuck in the past, trying to understand where I went wrong, trying to become the man I should have been from the start. Carla observed the exchange of glances between them, the vulnerability of David, the confusion of Sarah, and felt her resistance slightly diminish. She still didn't fully trust him, but it was impossible to ignore the sincerity in his words. David, Carla finally said, I spent 6 years hating you for what you did to my sister, and even if you've changed, even if your intentions are pure now, I'm still afraid that Sarah will get hurt again. I have that fear too, David surprisingly replied. She has always been too delicate for the brutal world I inhabited, and now pregnant, she's even more vulnerable. You two are talking about me as if I'm a child, incapable of making my own decisions, Sarah said, a hint of irritation in her voice. I am an adult woman, pregnant, but not incapacitated. David and Carla exchanged glances, recognizing the truth in her words. You're right, Carla admitted. I'm sorry, Sarah. It's hard not to want to protect you. I understand, but I need you both to understand that this is my choice. Staying here, accepting David's help, dealing with the complicated feelings that brings all of this is my decision. David nodded slowly. And if you decide you want to leave, I will respect that. And if I decide to stay? The question hung in the air like a fragile butterfly. David looked her in the eyes, and Sarah saw there a cautious hope he was trying to disguise. Then I will try every day to earn your trust, he said simply. Carla sighed deeply, finally finishing her wine. Okay, I still think you two are playing with fire. But Sarah is right. The decision is hers. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a more relaxed atmosphere, with David sharing about the changes he had implemented in his company, and Carla recounting stories about her most recent cases at the law firm. Sarah watched the two interact, still with some tension, but without the open hostility of before. When Carla finally said her goodbyes, it was already past 10 at night. Think carefully about what you two are doing, she said, hugging Sarah at the door. The past leaves scars, and not all of them heal completely. After Carla left, David and Sarah were alone in the living room, the weight of the night's revelations hanging between them like a dense fog. Thank you, Sarah finally said. For what? For being honest with her, for not trying to downplay what happened between us. David nodded. Carla was right about a lot of things. I hurt you deeply, Sarah. And if staying here is bringing those painful memories back, it is bringing them back, Sarah admitted. But it is also showing me that people can truly change, and that is something I didn't expect to discover. They separated to their respective rooms shortly after, but both knew that dinner had changed something fundamental between them. The cards were on the table now, and all that remained was to figure out how to play the next round. It was a rainy Thursday in April when everything changed. Sarah was in the office that David had improvised for her upstairs, his old painting studio transformed into a comfortable workspace with an ergonomic desk and a special chair for pregnant women. She was working on a financial analysis for a client when she felt the first contraction. At first, she thought it was just the usual discomfort of the 8th month of pregnancy, but when the second contraction came just 15 minutes later, followed by a third, even more intense, Sarah realized it was not a false alarm. Not now, not now, she murmured to herself, trying to breathe as she had learned in the childbirth preparation class. There were still 3 weeks until the due date. She picked up the phone to call David, but hesitated. He was in an important meeting with German investors, something he had mentioned several times as crucial for the company's international expansion. It was exactly the kind of situation he would never have interrupted for her in the past. A stronger contraction doubled her over the desk, and Sarah realized she had no choice. She dialed his number with trembling fingers. Sarah, is everything okay? David's voice showed immediate concern. David, I think it's starting. The contractions are regular. Where are you? At home, in the office? Don't move, I'm on my way. But your meeting, forget the meeting. The response came without hesitation, and Sarah felt something warm in her chest. Sarah, do you have the maternity bag ready? It's in the guest room closet. It's okay. Time the contractions. I'm on my way. David arrived home in record time, his hair disheveled and tie askew, clearly having rushed out of a meeting. He found Sarah in the living room, walking slowly and breathing deeply through a contraction. How far apart are they? He asked, rushing to grab the maternity bag. 10 minutes. Sarah leaned against the sofa, her face contorted in pain. David, I'm scared. He paused what he was doing and approached her, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. Hey, look at me. You're going to be fine. The baby is going to be fine. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Do you promise? I promise. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital was a mix of tension and intimacy that Sarah hadn't experienced in years. David drove with one hand on the wheel and the other intertwined with hers, murmuring words of encouragement with each contraction. The traffic in New York City was particularly heavy due to the rain, but David navigated the streets with the determination of someone on a sacred mission. David, Sarah said during a pause between contractions, if anything happens to me, nothing is going to happen. But if it does, I want you to know that these last 2 months have been good. Being close to you again reminded me of the person I loved. David squeezed her hand tighter. Sarah, you can't say those things right now. You need to focus on bringing your daughter into the world. Sarah noticed the slip. Our daughter. But said nothing. There was something comforting in the way David had naturally included himself in the situation, as if he were the biological father of the child. At the hospital, David took full control of the situation with the efficiency of a general coordinating a battle. He spoke with doctors, nurses, and administrative staff, ensuring that Sarah received the best possible care. But when it was time to enter the delivery room, he hesitated. Would you like me to stay? He asked, suddenly unsure. Sarah looked at him, disheveled hair, wrinkled suit, eyes filled with genuine concern, and realized she couldn't imagine going through this without him by her side. Please, stay. The next 12 hours were the most intense of both their lives. David held Sarah's hand through every contraction, whispered encouragements in her ear, wiped the sweat from her forehead. When the pain became unbearable, he breathed with her, reminding her of relaxation techniques. I can see the head, announced Dr. Smith, an experienced 50-year-old man who had been with Sarah throughout her pregnancy. One more push, Sarah. David looked at the small head covered in dark hair emerging and felt tears burning in his eyes. Sarah, she's beautiful. You're doing amazing. With one final monumental effort, accompanied by a scream that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Sarah brought her daughter into the world. The baby's first cry filled the room, a sound that made David cry openly for the first time in years. She's perfect, Dr. Smith smiled, placing the baby on Sarah's chest. 7 pounds and 2 ounces, all normal reflexes. Sarah looked at her daughter. Wet dark hair, rosy skin, eyes that opened for a few seconds as if trying to see the new world, and felt a love so intense it almost took her breath away. Hi, my love, she whispered, tears flowing freely. Mommy waited for you for so long. David approached, hesitant. Can I touch her? Sarah nodded, and David extended a finger that the baby immediately grasped with her tiny hand. The strength of the grip was surprising, and David felt something break and reform in his chest simultaneously. What will her name be? A nurse asked, preparing the birth certificate. Sarah looked at David, who was mesmerized by the baby. Sophia, she said softly, the name we chose together a long time ago. David looked up, surprised and emotional. It was true. During their marriage, they had spent hours discussing names for the children they dreamed of having. Sophia had been the unanimous choice for a girl. Sophia Adams Johnson, Sarah added, and David looked at her in total astonishment. Sarah, you don't have to. She needs a father, Sarah said simply. And you were here when she was born. You held my hand, you gave me strength. That makes you her father, biologically. or not. David sat in the chair next to the bed, his legs suddenly weak. "Sarah, are you sure? This changes everything." "I know." She transferred Sophia to his arms, watching how he held her with almost religious reverence. "But look at her, David. Look how she knows you." It was true. The baby had completely calmed in David's arms, as if recognizing his voice from all the nights he had talked to Sarah's belly, telling stories and making promises. "Hi, Sophia," David whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Daddy's here, princess. Daddy will take care of you forever." Sarah watched the scene, David cradling their daughter with infinite care, whispering promises of protection and love, and realized that somehow they had become a family. Not in the traditional way she had imagined, not without complications and issues to resolve, but a family nonetheless. When they finally went home 2 days later, David carried Sophia in the baby carrier, as if he were transporting the most precious treasure in the world. Sarah watched as he had transformed the guest room into a perfect nursery during their stay at the hospital. White crib, colorful mobile, shelves filled with children's books. "When did you have time to do all this?" she asked, impressed. "Last night. I couldn't sleep, so I came home and set everything up." David gently placed Sophia in the crib. "I wanted her to feel at home when she arrived." Sarah sat in the nursing chair that he had bought, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. "David, we need to talk about how this is going to work, about what we are now." "I know." He sat on the edge of the bed, watching the two of them. "But Sarah, regardless of what we decide about us, Sophia is my daughter now. Legally, emotionally, and in all the ways that matter, I will be present in her life." "I know, and I'm happy about that." Sarah reached out her hand to him. "But David, we can't live indefinitely in this grey area. We need to define what we are. Ex-spouses raising a daughter together, friends, or... David took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Or maybe something more." The words hung in the air like a promise and a challenge. David looked into Sarah's eyes and saw there the same cautious hope he felt in his own heart. "Sarah, I love you," he finally said straightforwardly. "I never stopped loving you, but I won't pressure you into anything. Sophia changed everything, and we need to figure out together how to navigate this new territory." "I love you too," Sarah admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "And that terrifies and excites me at the same time." David leaned in and gently kissed her forehead. "Then let's take it slow, one day at a time, discovering who we are now, as a family, as partners, as people who love each other but are still learning to trust again." Sophia stirred in the crib, letting out a small sigh, and they both turned to her with smiles on their faces. There was still much to resolve, difficult conversations to be had, old wounds to be fully healed. But for the first time in 6 years, Sarah allowed herself to believe that some love stories truly deserved a second chance. 2 months after Sophia's birth, life had taken on a routine neither of them had imagined possible. It was a sunny June morning when Sarah woke not to the sound of the baby crying, but to the soft sound of David's voice singing quietly in the next room. She stretched in the king-size bed of the master bedroom. She had moved in there the previous week, a decision that came naturally after consecutive nights sharing the care of Sophia. She got up slowly, still getting used to her postpartum body, and walked to the crib. Through the slightly open door, she saw David sitting in the nursing chair, Sophia nestled in his arms as he sang a gentle version of "You Are My Sunshine." The golden morning light streamed through the sheer curtains, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere around them. "On a blank page, I draw a yellow sun," David sang softly, swaying slightly. "And with 5 or 6 lines, it's easy to make a castle." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her heart tightening with emotion. In the last 2 months, she had witnessed David's complete transformation into a father. He woke up every night for the 2 a.m. feedings, changed diapers with the competence of an experienced nurse, and had memorized the lullabies Sarah used to hum during her pregnancy. "She sleeps better with this music," David whispered when he noticed Sarah at the door. "She has good taste." Sarah entered the room, leaning down to gently kiss Sophia's forehead. "How is my princess today?" "Perfect," David replied, but his eyes were fixed on Sarah. "How are you? Did you sleep well?" "Better than in months." Sarah sat on the edge of the makeshift bed by the crib, another recent addition for the nights when one of them needed to be closer to the baby. "David, we need to talk about some things." "About what?" He gently placed Sophia in the crib, where she continued to sleep peacefully. "About us, about this life we've built without really planning." Sarah looked around the lovingly decorated nursery. "About the fact that my apartment has been ready for 2 weeks, and I still haven't mentioned leaving." David sat beside her on the bed, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body. "Do you want to leave?" "No," the answer came, without hesitation. "And that scares me. Why does it scare you?" Sarah was silent for a few moments, organizing her thoughts. "Because it's too easy, David. Living here, sharing Sophia with you, waking up in the morning and seeing you making coffee in the kitchen. It's the life we dreamed of having 10 years ago, but that only became possible now. And is that bad? It's confusing." Sarah turned to face him. "Because I don't know if I'm staying out of love or convenience. If we're together because it really works, or because it's the easier path." David took her, hand intertwining their fingers with the naturalness of someone who had done this gesture thousands of times. "Sarah, these last 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because they are convenient or easy. Raising a baby is definitely not easy. But because I'm finally living the life I've always wanted to have." "But what if it doesn't work out again? What if we repeat the same mistakes?" "Then we'll learn from them and try again." David caressed the back of her hand with his thumb. "Sarah, I can't guarantee that we'll be perfect. I can guarantee that I will be honest with you, that I will prioritize our family above any business, and that I will fight every day to deserve you and Sophia." Sarah felt her eyes welling with tears. "David, I'm afraid of falling in love with you again and finding out that nothing has really changed. And I'm afraid that you'll realize you deserve someone much better than me," David admitted, the vulnerability clear in his voice. "But Sarah, fear cannot be stronger than love. And what I feel for you, that has never changed, not even in the worst moments." Sophia stirred in the crib, letting out a small sigh, and both. They turned to her automatically. It was incredible how this little child had become the center of their universe in such a short time. "She needs stability," Sarah said softly. "She needs to know she can count on us." And she can. David stood up and walked over to the crib, gently adjusting the pink blanket. "Sarah, marry me." The words hung in the air like flower petals in the wind. Sarah looked at David, who had his back to her, his hands resting on the crib's railing. "David, I know it's crazy." He turned around, and Sarah saw tears glistening in his eyes. "I know it's too soon, that we have so much to work through. But Sarah, I can't imagine my life without both of you. I don't want to imagine." Sarah slowly stood up and walked to him. "And if I say yes, what happens next? Then we build a real life together, not based on the past or the fear of the future, but on who we are now. 2 people who love each other, who have a beautiful daughter, and who want to try to be happy together. Sarah looked at Sophia, sleeping peacefully, then at David, who was watching her with cautious hope in his dark eyes. She thought about the last 2 months, the nights sharing baby duties, the mornings drinking coffee together while Sophia slept, the quiet moments when they simply existed as a family. "David Johnson," she finally said, a small but genuine smile curving her lips. "You're proposing to me in our daughter's nursery at 7 in the morning without even a ring." David laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders like a weight finally lifted. "Technically, I'm asking you to marry me again, and about the ring." He went to the cabinet and pulled out a small velvet box from a drawer. "I bought this 3 weeks ago, but I was waiting for the right moment." Sarah opened the box and found not a traditional solitaire, but a delicate ring with 3 stones, a diamond in the center, flanked by 2 smaller emeralds. It was unique, elegant, and completely different from the ostentatious engagement ring he had given her the first time. "The emeralds represent you and Sophia," David explained nervously, "and the diamond represents our love. Tested by pressure but stronger and brighter because of it." Sarah held the box with trembling hands. "David, if I say yes, there will be no more separations. No matter what happens, we face it together." "Together," he agreed, "in joy and in hardship, in wealth and in poverty, in health and in sickness." "Are you repeating wedding vows?" Sarah laughed through the tears that were now flowing freely. "I'm practicing." David smiled, taking the ring from the box. "So, Sarah Adams, mother of my daughter, love of my life, the woman who taught me what really matters, will you marry me again?" Sarah looked at Sophia, who had woken up and was watching them with her curious dark eyes. She looked at David, who was holding the ring with slightly trembling hands. She thought about everything they had been through, the love, the pain, the separation, the reunion, and now this second chance that felt like a miracle. "Yes," she finally said, "but with one condition." "What?" "No extravagant honeymoon this time. I want to spend our first week of marriage at home with Sophia, creating simple memories." David slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, before pulling her in for a kiss that tasted like forgiveness and hope. "Agreed. A homey honeymoon is the best honeymoon." Sophia chose that moment to give her first conscious smile, not just gas, but a genuine smile directed at her parents. David and Sarah laughed through their tears, realizing that perhaps their daughter was giving her blessing for this new family they were creating. "I think she approves," Sarah whispered. "She's a smart girl," David replied, picking up Sophia. "She knows a good family when she sees one." 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony in a garden of their home in Central Park, the same garden where Sarah had cultivated orchids years ago, they married again. It wasn't the grand and formal celebration of the first time, but a small gathering with close family and true friends. Carla served as the maid of honor, having finally accepted that David had truly changed. Sophia, then 5 months old, slept peacefully in Mrs. Johnson's arms throughout the ceremony. The vows they exchanged were different this time, more mature, more honest, more aware of the challenges they might face. David promised never to put work before family again. Sarah promised to communicate her needs instead of harboring resentments. They both promised that this time they would fight for their issues instead of running away from them. When the officiant declared them husband and wife again, and David kissed Sarah beneath the same rose bushes she had planted the first time they were married, everyone present knew they were witnessing not just a wedding, but a resurrection, the rebirth of a love that had survived time, pain, and their own human flaws. Sophia woke up at the exact moment they kissed, as if she knew it was her time to join the celebration. David held her in his arms, and the three of them stood there in the garden, surrounded by family and friends, but somehow existing only for themselves. "Welcome to my life, girls," David whispered, kissing each of their foreheads, "forever this time." Sarah looked at her husband, because he was her husband again, for better or for worse, then at the daughter who had united them definitively, and finally at the garden around them, blooming and lush under the September sun. Some love stories are written once. Others need to be rewritten, corrected, refined, until they find their final form. Their story had found its happy ending not in the first forever, but in the second, wiser, more mature, and infinitely more precious for having been earned through mutual understanding and personal growth. And as Sophia grew in her arms, surrounded by the love of parents who had learned that true love is not perfect but resilient, Sarah knew that some weights are worth every tear, every lonely night, every moment of doubt. Because when true love returns, it does not come back the same way it left. It returns transformed, strengthened, and ready to last a lifetime.